They said it so quietly, but the church pews heard it all. She's not family. Miranda's voice, thin and venomous, hovered in the air between hymns. I was kneeling by the coffin, smoothing the edge of David's folded hands. A single peach blossom rested on his heart. I barely heard her whisper, yet I felt its blade. 3 days later, I stood in the small Baptist chapel in Savannah, Georgia, reading the revised will. Miranda's face went ashen when she reached the page with the $145 million clause. Gasps, the scrape of chairs, a sound like history shifting under feet. If this story tugs at something deep in your bones, if you believe that kindness deserves its day, and truth its moment, then please smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. Because Grandma True Stories isn't just about tales. It's about voices once silenced, made loud. About stories like this, echoing out so the world remembers what justice feels like. The chapel smelled of magnolias and polished wood. Everything was clasped neat and proper. My husband, David, would have hated it. Keep it small, he once told me, just friends and God. But the children, his son Adrian and his daughter Lila, insisted. Something grand. Something respectable. I stood beside his casket, fingers trembling as I placed a pale peach blossom atop the crisp white satin lining. The petals were soft, perfumed, and innocent. I was trying to believe this was goodbye, but Miranda stepped close, red silk clutch in hand, her stilettos echoing off the marble floor. I heard her breathe, sharp and disdainful. "She's not family," she muttered, just loud enough for me to feel it. "Just another caretaker's shadow. Let her fade like dust in daylight." I froze. The blossom landed in my lap instead. Their eyes, all of them, turned. Mine to them, theirs away from me. My son Adrian didn't move. Lila sighed, looked down at her nails. Not one person, except the minister, asked me if I needed help, if I wanted a moment. No one offered their hand. Not a word of defense. Silence spelled out the ownership they believed they had over me. Outsider, servant, nobody. When the ceremony ended, I walked out last. I passed beneath the arched oak doors of the chapel, letting the humid Georgia air wash over me. I tried to breathe. That's when I saw it. Miranda at the curb, laughing with her friends, slipping her phone into her purse. On her manicured hand shined my wedding ring. My David's ring, which was supposed to have been returned to me after they cleaned him for the funeral. I approached quietly. "That ring," I said softly. "It's mine." Miranda turned. Her red lipstick glinted in the sunlight. "He wanted me to have it," she declared. "We were family." Her words drew something sharp inside me. Betrayal, cold and heavy. I said nothing more. I turned and drove home. The house was quiet. I crossed into what used to be his study, pulled up the loose floorboard beneath the rug, and reached into the space only I knew. The safe. There, in velvet pouch and sealed folder, was what David had pressed into my hand just 10 days before he died. "Keep this if they forget who you are," he had whispered. The code scribbled on a torn page from a steakhouse napkin. His hands had been weak, but his words steady. I wasn't ready to read the folder that night. I was still breathing beside him. But now, standing in our empty study, I opened it. My eyes traced the legal documents. Notarized trust, power of attorney, derivations, signed and dated. He had rewritten the estate. The beneficiary was me. Not his children. Not the daughter-in-law who spat at me in that chapel. Me. That piece of paper felt heavier than all the stones of that church. Like gravity had been realigned. I kissed the velvet pouch, our old house key. Then I made tea. Not to soothe, really, but to settle my hands. The days that followed were quiet. I let the grief breathe around me. The roses on the porch wilted. The curtains sagged. But the truth had a shape now. 3 days after the funeral, I sent invitations. Not for condolences or prayers, but for the public reading of David's final decisions. One simple note addressed to every name in that family's directory. "Please gather at First Baptist Hall in Savannah at 2 p.m., public reading of the trust." They all came. Miranda arrived first. Cream dress, pearl earrings, a face painted for performance. Adrian beside her, tense, polite. Lila aloof, scrolling her phone. They looked certain. Confident that the legacy would land where they believed it always had belonged. But as the clock ticked past 2, I stood in the center of that hall with the mahogany folder in my hands. I looked out at them, not as a nurse, not as a second wife, not as a shadow, but as the keeper of truth. My friends, family, I began, voice steady even though my heart shook. What I'm about to read is his final trust document, signed 10 days before he passed, with capacity, with clarity, witnessed and notarized. Miranda's eyes narrowed. This must be one of those poetry nights, she said under her breath. Someone laughed low. This is not poetry. The notary sat beside me, elderly man with hands knotted by years, with soft gray eyebrows that carried wisdom. He handed me a sealed envelope. Everything is here. I opened it. The trust. $145 million in assets, liquid and real property alike, Tota's loss inversions, everything. Effective immediately upon his death. I held up the document. And I am the sole beneficiary. Shock pressed against the walls of the hall. Miranda gasped, sound snapping threads of disbelief. Adrian looked away. Lila dropped her phone. There were voices behind me, whispers and struck jaws. But I did not give them the satisfaction of panic. I did not let them see the crumble. But I have no intention of keeping it all. I continued. Because David's last heartbeat was not for entitlement. It was for purpose. Miranda nearly stepped forward. You can't do this. He was barely lucid. The notary shook his head. He was fully capable. Witnesses present. All legal. He showed the time-stamped video, the affidavits, the medical reports. I turned back to the crowd. $90 million will go toward creating the Willow Rest Home, a sanctuary for elderly women abandoned by those who should have honored them. $40 million will establish the Clarabelle Scholarship Fund for students studying geriatric nursing, Compassion First. And the remainder, $5 million, the last fragment, goes to his former wife, Anna, not out of spite, but because even after all the pain, she once said she was glad he found someone who brought him peace. Miranda stood up so quickly the chair scraped the floor. This is manipulation. You pressured him when he was weak. Her voice cracked. I met her gaze. Pressured? No. Loved him. Respected him. I stayed. The room went so still you could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the back corner. I folded the trust closed. My hands didn't tremble. Later, they called it betrayal. She tried to contest. But in Georgia courts, clarity matters. Evidence matters. And the clause, any challenge redirected to Willow Rest, meant that fighting me would cost more than conceding. She whispered again. You're not family. And I smiled softly. Because in that moment, I was more family than she ever dreamed. More thrust of heart than title. More witness than plaintiff. She did not stay for the prayers that followed. Miranda stormed out in a whirl of pale silk and fractured entitlement, leaving behind the echo of her heels and the stench of performance. She had walked into that chapel expecting a coronation, and left like a rumor, trailing disbelief and rage. I stayed. I sat back in the wooden pew where David once held my hand during sermons, my palms now empty but full of something else, something like justice, like breath. The crowd dissolved slowly. A few came to speak kind words. Some offered soft nods. Most left quiet, unsure how to process what they'd just witnessed. But I remained until the janitor gently touched my shoulder and said, "Ma'am, I'll lock up soon." I smiled, thanked him, and walked back into the Savannah evening. The air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet. That night, I returned to the house. It felt different now, lighter, but still hollow in the way houses always feel when love has recently left them. I placed the mahogany folder back into the safe, kissed the velvet pouch again, then walked into the sunroom and sat with a cup of tea. No television. No music. Just the crickets and the slow unraveling of adrenaline. I slept a full night for the first time in months. In the morning, the phone calls began. Not from family, no. They stayed silent, probably busy crafting emails to lawyers and Googling contest trust documents between sips of bitterness. No, the calls came from strangers. A woman from South Carolina who had seen a clip of the reading, only a minute long, where Miranda's whisper, "She's not family," was followed by the line, "Then perhaps you should have visited more than once every 4 months." The clip had been recorded by a teen who worked as an audio tech for the church. He had uploaded it to TikTok, then Instagram, then YouTube. It spread like pollen, drifting on the digital wind, rooting in unexpected places. I didn't know until my neighbor Ruth came over with tears in her eyes and said, "Maggie, your story, it's everywhere." I didn't understand. What story? She held up her phone. "You're a hashtag." At first, I felt a strange kind of embarrassment. The internet? That wild place where people argue over sandwich recipes and compare pets to celebrities? That's where my grief had landed. But then came the messages. Hundreds, then thousands. Women mostly. Some men. Many older. Some younger. They wrote to say thank you. One said, "I watched your clip every day for a week before confronting my son who treats me like a burden." Another simply said, "Now I know it's okay to speak, even at 72. Some told stories worse than mine, cast aside after a lifetime of service, labeled gold diggers for marrying late in life, called guests in homes they built with their own hands. One woman shared how her daughter had refused to include her in the birth certificate signing of her grandchild. Not blood enough, they'd said. Another had been locked out of her home after her husband passed. The locks changed before the body was even cold. These weren't just stories. These were echoes. And they told me I had never been alone in this pain. I had only believed I was because women like us are taught to carry it silently. The local news picked it up first. Savannah widow inherits $145 million, gives most away. Then the nationals. Headlines like, "Hospice wife turns heir turns heroine." A blogger called it the most dignified clapback in inheritance history. Miranda tried to respond. She wrote a long post on Facebook about manipulation, about grief, about not wanting to air family matters publicly. But the internet remembered. They posted the clip again. The whisper, the ring, the smug glance. And that was all it took. The school board she chaired asked her to resign. A cosmetics company quietly removed her from their lifestyle ambassador list. Even her high-end parenting podcast lost its sponsors. I didn't feel joy exactly. But I won't lie, I felt settled. As though the truth had reached a wider room, finally given space to stretch. Adrian, my stepson, reached out next. Not by call. By email. Subject line, "I didn't know." It was short. Too short for the pain it should have addressed. Just a single paragraph that ended with, "I guess I should have been there more." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing more to say to a man who couldn't stand up when I was being torn apart beside his father's coffin. Instead, I went to the closet, pulled out the seed packets I'd been saving. Lavender, wild marigolds, soft climbing roses. I planted them out back, hands in the earth, sun on my neck. I whispered to David's memory, "You said build something beautiful. So I will." The first public donation arrived 5 days later. A man from Idaho who'd lost his wife to Alzheimer's sent a check for $2,000 and a note that read, "Because you reminded me to love the people who stay." I cried over that letter. Not because of the money, but because someone saw. Not just me, but the labor of love. The staying. The wiping of mouths. The sleepless nights. The aching silence. The Willow Rest project began with that seed. We filed the papers. Got the permits. I worked with Ruth and 2 retired nurses to draft the mission statement. For women who gave without asking. Who were silenced but never surrendered. A sanctuary, not a shelter. A home, not a holding place. Miranda, meanwhile, disappeared from the conversation. Some said she moved to Atlanta. Others claimed she tried to pitch a documentary deal. I don't know. I didn't care to chase ghosts. I was too busy growing something real. The trust money was dispersed carefully, deliberately. The lawyers called me meticulous. I called it respect. Every penny was placed where David had wished it, where I had refined it. And still the letters came. I kept them in a carved wooden box near my bed. Dozens of them. Notes from widows, students, volunteers, even a few judges. One letter from a woman in Maine simply said, "Because of you, I told my children they could not talk to me like that anymore." I held that one for a long time. I wasn't looking for fame. I was looking for peace. But sometimes peace arrives with an audience. There were still moments of sadness. I missed him most at dusk, when the house darkened just so and his absence pressed into the corners. I kept one of his ties hanging behind the bedroom door. Not for mourning, for memory. And then, 3 weeks after the reading, a small envelope arrived. No return address. Pale blue, sealed with a soft wax emblem I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. My stomach dropped when I saw the handwriting. It was from her, David's first wife. The envelope trembled in my hand. Not because it was heavy, but because I knew exactly who it was from the moment I saw the wax seal. A small emblem pressed into pale blue wax. A crescent moon surrounded by stars. The same design that once adorned the corner of every holiday card she used to send when David was still married to her. Anna, his first wife. The woman Miranda used to call the ghost behind the wedding photo. The woman whose name was spoken with a strange mix of bitterness and reverence around David's family. She had long disappeared from the periphery of their lives. Divorce, distance, and decades tend to do that. But she had always been a quiet presence. A shadow not of regret, but of understanding. And now she was here. In this envelope. I waited a day before opening it. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I wanted the moment to land fully. I lit a candle, brewed mint tea, and sat at the kitchen table David built himself the summer after we married. The sun was low, and the room glowed that soft orange that only Georgia evenings know how to do right. I broke the seal. The first lines made my throat close. He chose love, and love chose justice. My hands shook, not from surprise, but from the sudden, unfiltered ache of being understood by someone I never thought would say it. I watched you from a distance when you married him, she wrote, not with envy, but with disbelief. That a man I once called mine had somehow softened in your presence. That he smiled differently. I recognized it, because he never smiled like that with me. She continued. Her script was deliberate and smooth, as though every word had been carved carefully. I know what it costs to love someone through illness. I know what it takes to hold their dignity for them when their hands can no longer do it. And I also know what it feels like to be erased from a room you helped build. I covered my mouth. My tears weren't loud, but they were relentless, streaming down my cheeks like spring rain on pained glass. Not grief, not bitterness, just release. You did for him what I could not. You walked him home. And though I no longer carry his name, I carry the gratitude that he found someone who made his final years full of peace. You gave him laughter. You gave him belonging. And then came the words that broke something inside me. I regret that my son, our son, stood silent when his wife disrespected you. I regret that he sat there while she turned you into furniture at your own husband's funeral. I raised him better than that. And I carry that failure like a stone in my chest. She went on. She told me about the first time she saw me with David, an old photo at an art fundraiser. She remembered how light his eyes looked, how his hand rested on my waist like it belonged there. That photo told me he had found peace, she wrote. And I had always hoped he would. She ended the letter with a single line. You are not a footnote. You are the final chapter he chose and the best one. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the drawer with our wedding photo. I didn't tell anyone I'd received it. Not even Ruth. Not Lon, the sweet volunteer who had started helping me organize the scholarship fund. Some things aren't for sharing. Some acknowledgments live better in silence, held like warmth, not waved like flags. The internet kept spinning. The clip had now passed 4 million views. Commenters began calling me the Southern Widow Saint. Some tagged their own daughters-in-law, captioning it, "Be careful who you underestimate." I didn't read all the comments, but sometimes I did, and sometimes they lifted me. A nurse from Tennessee wrote, I stayed with my patient until her last breath, even though her family never showed. This story gave me the strength to stop apologizing for being the only one who cared. Another, my husband's kids hate me, but you reminded me that love has nothing to do with DNA. And yet, amid all the voices lifting me, one finally broke the silence. Adrian. He came by one afternoon unannounced. I saw his car before I heard the knock. A cautious silver Lexus with plates I still recognized. He didn't bring Miranda. He didn't bring flowers. just a face that had aged more in the last month than in the last decade. I opened the door. He stood there like a boy caught skipping class. "I shouldn't have let her say that to you," he said. "At the funeral." I didn't say anything at first, just opened the screen and stepped aside. He entered like he didn't deserve to, and in a way he didn't. But David had loved him once. That counted for something. We sat on the porch. The hydrangeas were blooming and the air smelled like fresh earth and lemon oil. "I let her lead," he said. "I didn't know how to navigate it all. You and Dad. The marriage. The estate." I nodded. Not out of forgiveness yet. Just acknowledgement. "She's gone," he added. "Moved back to her sisters in Augusta. Took the handbags and the cold shoulders with her." I almost smiled. "I'm sorry," he said. And this time it was quiet. Real. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a paperback. Worn bookmarked. The Art of Dignity. David's favorite book. "I started therapy," Adrian said. "Trying to understand what it means to have a spine again." That's when I touched his arm. Not a full embrace. Just a simple gesture. "You're always welcome here," I told him. "If you come honest." He stayed for 2 cups of tea, then left. We didn't speak of the trust. Not once. It wasn't about that anymore. Meanwhile, Willow Rest had its groundbreaking ceremony. A modest crowd. Shovels lined with ribbon. I gave a small speech, voice quivering but firm. "This place is for the ones the world forgot. The ones who never asked but always gave." The walls began to rise. Brick by brick, something new was being built, where silence had once lived. And I no longer felt like a woman who had merely inherited a legacy. I felt like one who was finally becoming one. The first night in the cottage next to Willow Rest was quiet. No camera crews. No reporters. No headlines. Just me, an old rocking chair, and the scent of peach tea rising from a chipped ceramic mug David once brought back from Charleston. It had a tiny crack down the side. I never fixed it. Some things don't need to be flawless to be worthy. The rooms were still half empty. My bedroom had only a single dresser, 1 lamp, a crocheted rug from Gloria, and 3 things on my oak table I would never move. A framed photo, our wedding day. Me in a borrowed dress with buttons I couldn't quite fasten. David in a suit a size too big, because he'd lost weight during chemo. His hand was shaking as he placed the ring on mine, but his eyes were steady, like he knew exactly what he was choosing. Beside the photo sat the letter from Anna. Folded, worn at the creases, ink smudged in spots where my tears had landed the first time I read it. I still read it once a month. Not because I need her words to know who I am, but because they remind me I was seen. Not as a second wife, not as a nurse, but as someone who stayed. And the last thing, a single white rose in a mason jar. It had dried over time. The petals curled inward like they were whispering secrets only the still-hearted could understand. That rose wasn't decoration. It was memory. I didn't expect to still be here, telling stories at 78. And yet, every Sunday evening, I walk through the side door of Willow Rest into the sunflower-painted common room, where 12 folding chairs wait for me. On each chair sits a woman who thought she had no story left to tell. Widows mostly. Some abandoned mothers. A few left by their families at truck stops with nothing but a suitcase and a silence so loud it cracked ceilings. But here they talk. And week by week, I watch dignity return. It arrives slowly. First as a raised eyebrow, then as a chuckle, then a full laugh that fills the room like fresh air after rain. Justice House, Willow Rest, whatever people want to call it now, is no longer just a sanctuary. It is a promise. A promise that grief doesn't make you invisible. That silence is not erasure. That being overlooked does not mean being unworthy. On the west side of the house, just outside the kitchen, grows a rose bush we named Clara after the first woman who moved in. She arrived with a shopping bag full of old receipts and a single velvet shoe from the 80s. Said her son told her the nursing home had no space. She wore that velvet shoe with pride to our Valentine's tea. When I told her she looked like a queen, she said, "Baby, I forgot I could be seen." That's all this place is. A home for the forgotten, built on love that was once dismissed. Sometimes people still ask about Miranda. Did she ever come back? No. Not once. Rumor has it she tried to launch a podcast about grief. Episode 1 opened with her telling her side of the story. Episode 2 never aired. Some ghosts haunt their own houses. Others, like me, we build new ones. Adrian visits sometimes. He brings books for the library. He helps repaint the porch. He drinks his tea slower now. More intentional. We don't talk about the will. We talk about weather, about his daughter, about the first time he saw his father smile after the stroke. The world doesn't always offer second chances, but I believe in planting them anyway. In the hallway leading to my room, there's a wall. It's not painted, not polished. Just raw wood, filled with letters, drawings, and scribbled thank you notes sent from all over the country. Women who found courage in a story they were never supposed to hear. Widows who stood up to greedy children. Nurses who asked for the respect they had been too tired to demand. Girls who saw that silence could be strength. That love could be quiet and still move mountains. One note, written in red crayon, just says, "You made us brave." I keep it at eye level. On the night of our 1-year anniversary since the will reading, we held a small candlelight vigil. Nothing elaborate. Just tea, soft music, and a toast with peach cider. I lit a single candle and whispered, "You chose love. And love chose justice." Because that's all this ever was. Not a revenge story. Not a fairy tale. But proof. Proof that caretakers are not invisible. That wives are not defined by the years they wore the ring, but by the days they stayed when no one else did. That real love, the quiet kind, does not vanish at funerals. It builds houses. So if this story touched your heart, if you believe in the strength of quiet women, in justice that blooms slowly and lasts longer than noise, please tap that subscribe button and join us here at Grandma Untold Stories. Because here, every whisper matters. Every silence is honored. And every story, especially the ones that were never supposed to be told, deserves to echo. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And never forget, sometimes the strongest revenge is building something beautiful in silence.